Back in 2017, the golf world received a news alert that felt more shocking than a missed 2-foot putt on the 18th green. Phil Mickelson and his longtime caddy, Jim "Bones" Mackay, were done. After 25 years together, after 5 majors, after more than 40 PGA Tour wins. The official story? A mutual decision. A peaceful end to one of the greatest player-caddy partnerships in the history of the sport. Both men smiled. Both said the right things. Everyone clapped and moved on. But here is the truth that the press releases never told you. That breakup was not peaceful. It was not mutual. And it definitely was not just about Phil needing a fresh start. Behind the closed doors of the tour vans and the private jets, something had been rotting for years. Something that involved money. Something that involved respect. And something that ultimately forced Bones to do what nobody thought he would ever do. Walk away from the man he had bled for since 1992. Now, I know what you are thinking. It happens. Caddies get fired. Players move on. But this was different. This was a brotherhood that survived cancer scares, heartbreaking major losses, and the wildest highs golf has ever seen. If this relationship could shatter, then what does that say about loyalty in professional sports? Over the next few minutes, we are going to peel back the layers. We will look at the real reason Bones packed up that bag and never looked back. The hidden tension, the broken promises, the moment the final straw actually dropped. But I am not going to give it all away right now, because the details are far uglier than anyone ever reported. So here is my question to you, the real fans. Do you think a caddy who gives 25 years of his life deserves to be treated like a business expense? Or was Phil simply protecting his own interests? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to know where you stand on this. And if you love digging into the real stories behind the headlines, not the fluff, make sure you are subscribed, because this is the kind of golf talk you just do not get anywhere else. To understand why that breakup sent shockwaves through the entire golf ecosystem, you have to understand what Bones actually meant to Phil. This was not just a guy carrying a bag. This was a partnership that redefined what a player-caddy relationship could be. Bones was Phil's eyes on the greens. He was the voice of reason when the left-hander was about to do something reckless. He was the psychologist, the confidant, and the guy who would tell Phil the hard truths when nobody else on the team had the guts to say them. For 25 years, Bones never missed a single tournament. Never. He was the constant in a career filled with massive highs and crushing, soul-destroying lows. Think about the 2006 US Open at Winged Foot. Phil had the tournament in his hands. One driver off the fairway. One catastrophic double bogey. That loss devastated him. Bones was the first guy to walk alongside him, putting a hand on his shoulder, telling him to keep his head up. That is not in the job description. That is family. Or go back to 2013 at Muirfield, when Phil finally lifted the claret jug. That iconic image of Phil kissing the trophy? Bones was right there in the frame, soaked in champagne, grinning like a proud brother. Those 5 majors and 41 PGA Tour wins were not just Phil's victories. They were Bones's victories. He earned every single one of them, carrying the weight, literally and figuratively, through rain, heat, travel fatigue, and the relentless pressure of professional golf. But here is where the story starts to turn dark. When Amy Mickelson was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2009, Phil took a break from the tour. Bones stayed by his side, not just on the golf course, in the hospital waiting rooms, in the quiet moments when nobody was watching. He showed up. He sacrificed his own family time to make sure Phil and his wife had support. That kind of loyalty is not bought, it is earned. So when you look at that 2017 press release, the one that called it a mutual decision, you have to ask yourself one question. If this bond was that unbreakable, that deep, what on earth could possibly destroy it? What could push a man of that loyalty to walk away from the only player he had ever worked for? That question is exactly what we are about to answer. And the answer might make you rethink everything you thought you knew about Phil Mickelson. Bones had given everything to Phil, and the one thing he expected in return was respect. But respect, as it turns out, had a price tag. And that price tag was about to tear them apart. Let us take a closer look at what the official narrative actually said. On June 20th, 2017, both men released statements. Phil said, and I quote, "After 25 very valuable and memorable years, Bones and I have mutually decided to end our player-caddy relationship. Our decision was not based on a single event. Bones followed up with his own carefully crafted words. He mentioned how grateful he was for the journey. He talked about the dream of caddying in the Ryder Cup. It was all very polite, very professional, very much a lie, because if you were paying close attention to the golf world in the weeks before that announcement, you would have noticed something strange. Bones was not on the bag at the Memorial Tournament. 3 weeks before the official breakup, he was already gone. The news had not broken yet, but the damage was done. Tim Mickelson, Phil's younger brother, was carrying the bag that week. Nobody knew why at the time. There was no explanation, just a quiet change that everyone assumed was temporary. But it was not temporary, and it was not a mutual decision. Bones did not walk away because he wanted a new challenge. Bones walked away because he had been pushed, and the man pushing him was the same man he had called a brother for 25 years. A peaceful split? That was the story they wanted you to believe. But the truth started coming out years later, when a journalist named Alan Shipnuck published a bombshell biography. And what he uncovered turned everything upside down. You see, professional golf is not just about the glory on Sunday afternoons. It is also about the money. The FedEx Cup was introduced during the middle of Phil and Bones' partnership, and when that massive bonus pool was created, Phil made a promise to his caddy. He said Bones would get a percentage of whatever he earned from the FedEx Cup season. It was a handshake deal, a gentleman's agreement between two friends who had been through everything together. But here is where the story gets ugly. For 10 years, Phil never paid. Not a single dime from that FedEx Cup money ever reached Bones' bank account. Year after year, the debt grew. Bones kept track. He calculated every dollar he was owed. And by the time 2017 rolled around, that number had ballooned to a staggering $900,000. That is not pocket change. That is life-changing money for a man who spent his career carrying someone else's clubs. When Bones finally confronted Phil about the unpaid debt, Phil paid a portion of it, around $400,000. But that was not enough. It was barely half of what he actually owed, and Bones was left feeling like his loyalty had been reduced to a line item on a balance sheet. A man who had sacrificed his own career, his own family time, and his own health for a quarter of a century was being treated like a forgotten vendor. $900,000. That was the number. But here is the thing. It was never really about the money. The money was just the symptom. The real rot went much deeper. Think about what it means to be a caddy at that level. You wake up before sunrise. You walk miles and miles in punishing heat. You carry a bag that weighs more than 30 pounds. You read greens that are so fast they look like glass. You talk a player off the ledge when his game is falling apart, and you do all of that knowing that the glory will never be yours. You are invisible. The camera never finds you when the putt drops. The trophy never has your name on it. Bones accepted that reality because he believed Phil appreciated it. He believed the partnership was built on mutual respect. But when Phil started showing up late to tee times, ignoring Bones' advice on the course, and treating his caddy's suggestions like background noise, that belief started to crack. Bones was no longer a partner. He was an employee, and employees can be replaced. There was one incident that perfectly captures the shift in their relationship. Whenever Phil won a tournament, he would keep the championship flag. It was a tradition. He would hang them in his grandfather's kitchen. But Bones was the one who actually earned those flags alongside him. And yet, Phil never offered to share them. Not once. When Bones finally mentioned it, Phil dismissed it. It was a small thing, but small things add up. They become heavy. And over 25 years, the weight becomes unbearable. By the time they reached the Memorial Tournament in 2017, the weight had become too much. Bones was done. But the way it ended was not the way anyone expected. The tension had been building for months, maybe even years. Bones had stopped being just a caddy. He had become a witness to Phil's growing detachment from the values that defined his early career. And when Phil seemed more interested in his business dealings and his image than the actual game, Bones reached a breaking point. At the Memorial Tournament, with nobody watching and no cameras rolling, Bones looked Phil in the eye and handed over the yardage book. He told Phil he could not do it anymore. He was done. He walked off the course and left the man he had stood beside for 25 years standing alone on the practice green. That was the moment the partnership actually ended. The press releases came weeks later, but the real breakup happened in that quiet, unremarkable moment. And here is the part that makes this story so painful. Phil never fired Bones. Bones quit. He walked away from the remaining debt. He walked away from the legacy. He walked away from everything he had built, because staying would have cost him his dignity. That is not a resignation. That is a survival instinct. Phil would go on to win another major at age 50. Bones would go on to become a beloved commentator and then caddy for Justin Thomas, winning a PGA championship with him. Both men found success after the split, but the shadow of that betrayal never really faded. And then Phil made one of the most shocking moves in golf history. He defected to Lever Golf. He became the face of the Saudi-backed Rebel Tour. The man who once represented everything pure about American golf became the most controversial figure in the sport. And a lot of fans started wondering if something had been lost when Bones walked away. Maybe the conscience of Phil Mickelson left that day at the Memorial Tournament. Maybe Bones was the one who kept Phil grounded, who reminded him of who he was supposed to be. And without him, Phil drifted into a world that eventually consumed his reputation. Now, Bones never publicly trashed Phil. He was too classy for that. But the people who know him have told stories. They have talked about the hurt, the betrayal, the feeling of being used for 25 years and then discarded like a worn-out club. He does not talk about the money. He does not talk about the late nights or the early mornings. He just talks about the disappointment. And that might be the saddest part. Because the final betrayal was not about $900,000. It was about $900,000 that should never have been a question in the first place. It was about a man who gave everything and was told his everything was not worth the bill. So where does that leave us? What do we take away from this story? Golf fans love to debate loyalty. We love to argue about who is a true legend and who is just a name on a leaderboard. But this story is not about golf. It is about trust. It is about the price of friendship. And it is about what happens when one person believes they are irreplaceable and another person finally proves them wrong. Bones Mackay did not just walk away from a job. He walked away from a man he had loved like a brother. And he walked away because he realized that brotherhood, in Phil's eyes, was a one-way street. That is the betrayal. That is the thing that ended everything. Now, I will leave you with this. If you were Bones, carrying that bag for 25 years, watching the man you bled for treat you like an afterthought over $900,000, would you have walked away sooner? Or would you have stayed, hoping things would change? Let me know what you think in the comments. Your perspective matters to me, and I actually read every single one. And before you go, if this kind of deep dive into the real stories of golf is what you have been looking for, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. We are building a community of fans who care about the truth, not just the headlines. I would love to have you along for the ride.